So I was talking about basketball with a friend of mine the other day, and he said that if Giannis Antetokounmpo stays healthy, he is going to finish his career as a top 5 player all time. And I was like, okay, I think it's a little too soon to be saying statements like that. Maybe he has that potential, but it's too early for me to make any declarations like that. And he said, well, he doesn't agree. And the reason why is because Giannis already, in his opinion, has a top 10 peak in NBA history. He thinks that Giannis Antetokounmpo, as he was last season, was one of the top 10 best peaks we have ever seen from a player. And I was like, alright, you gotta chill out. You gotta calm down. Alright, that is way too far for Giannis already. I do not agree that he is already that good. And I've been thinking about it since then, and honestly, he might not have been as crazy as I thought when he first said it. So today, we're going to look at some of the other greatest players in NBA history, and we're going to talk about whether or not Giannis Antetokounmpo has already been one of the top 10 players by peak in all of NBA history. So let's get into it. For starters, let's get the obvious ones out of the way. The guys who Giannis very clearly, unless you're completely delusional, does not have a better peak than, alright? Michael Jordan, LeBron James, boom. Easy. Those two players are very clearly better at their best than Giannis Antetokounmpo is right now. I don't think it should be a debate. Shaquille O'Neal and Hakeem Olajuwon, who I would probably say have the third and fourth best peak ever, same thing. Boom. Easy. Better peaks than Giannis Antetokounmpo. Hakeem, I could see someone crazy making some kind of an argument that Giannis is better than him offensively, but I don't think it's a very large gap. Meanwhile, Hakeem is one of the two best defenders ever, so I think he clearly outtakes Giannis, especially with his playoff performances, just going so far up on offense. Shaq, meanwhile, not as good defensively at his peak as Giannis was, but still a good defender, and offensively, he clears him. So Shaq, definitely over Giannis. Hakeem, definitely over Giannis. After those top 4, you can kinda sorta start to make some arguments. I would say, I don't know the exact order I would put these in, but Wilt Chamberlain is somewhere up next around 1967. I would probably have him over Giannis. I would say that similar offensively, but Wilt was a better defender with his rim protection. I think Giannis's defense is a little bit overrated right now. We saw last season that he was not able to carry the Bucks defense on his own without Brook Lopez. And while he's still an elite, borderline defensive player of the year level defender, I do think there is a clear gap between him and the absolute greatest defenders of all time, like a Wilt Chamberlain, a David Robinson, even a Rudy Gobert to an extent, with the level of rim protection that they provide. I'm very high on Rudy Gobert's defense. I know that's not a popular opinion, but I think Giannis, his defense is just a little overrated right now. So Wilt Chamberlain, I would clearly have over Giannis at his peak. Next guy up, maybe Larry Bird. I would probably give Larry Bird a slim edge over Giannis as a peak player. I think he just does more on offense. I would say he's a little bit better of a scorer, a little bit better of a playmaker. Defensively, Giannis is a little bit better, but I like playmaking a lot. It's something that's very valuable to me. I think it's the most impactful part of the game. So I'm going to give Larry Bird a slim edge over Giannis as a peak player. Tim Duncan, I think I have to give him an edge over Giannis. Giannis is definitely a better offensive player. Tim Duncan is definitely better on defense. For me, I'm just so high on Tim Duncan's 2003 season. I really think that roster, it's not appreciated enough how bad the roster he carried through the finals was to the championship. The defense that he showed, the offense he showed, I would give Tim Duncan a slim edge over Giannis right now because I think he's the third greatest defender all time, and he was almost as good as him offensively at his best. I think his offense is a little underrated in that season. Kevin Garnett is another guy who comes to mind, actually, at this time. KG is a very comparable defender to Giannis. I would say KG is definitely better. He's a very comparable player to Giannis, as being sort of a non-traditional power forward. He was a very good playmaker for his time. Giannis is a little bit better of a scorer, even though KG did play in a slower era. Do I take Giannis over Kevin Garnett? I don't know. I think I would have to give Kevin Garnett a slight edge for the defense, but it's really close because Giannis definitely has the scoring edge. I'm going to put that one as a maybe. And while I am leaning Tim Duncan, like I said, that one's honestly kind of a maybe as well. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the third best player ever, is somehow someone I skipped over here. At first glance, at first thought, I was like, you know what, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is definitely clears Giannis. Obviously, they're not even close. But when I think about it more, he still definitely clears Giannis, but it is closer than I initially gave it credit for. I think Kareem being third all-time, in large part due to his insane longevity, makes his peak seem a little bit better than it was, but in reality, I don't think he's, like, as good of a rim protector or a defender in general. Like, he's not really in that top 10 defenders conversation. He was known for, like, taking nights off on defense and being kind of lazy at times throughout his career. I think also his peak defensively didn't happen at the same time as his peak offensively. It was a few years difference between them. So Kareem was a better defender than Giannis at his peak, but I don't think it was as big of a gap as people give it credit for. He was definitely a better scorer than Giannis is, but I also think, like, Giannis is so good that it's still not an insane gap scoring-wise. Like, people don't appreciate how good of a scorer Giannis is, especially last season where his mid-range started coming around. Giannis was an above-average mid-range shooter last season. Statistically, he was. He shot above average on long twos. Look at the league averages. It's crazy to say. It doesn't make sense, but he did. So, you know, his scoring is incredible, but Kareem definitely has an edge, and Kareem was a pretty underrated playmaker as well. He was really good. I would give a slight edge to Giannis as a playmaker, but Kareem was definitely, like, not too far behind. So, Kareem over Giannis, 100%, but, like, it's not as far as people think. Kobe Bryant and Magic Johnson, the players who I would probably say have two of the weakest peaks in the top 10. Bill Russell is another one. Bill Russell's case is just defense, but I mean, if you've been watching this channel, you know I'm really high on Bill Russell. I think he is the best defender of all time, and that defensive impact alone puts him over Giannis for me. As good as Giannis Antetokounmpo is, he obviously crushes Bill Russell offensively, but I think the defensive gap still makes up for it because his defense was just so absurdly, insanely good, all right, along with his leadership. Magic and Kobe. Oh man, the Kobe fans are going to get pissy at me here. They're going to get really mad. I'm going to put both of these as a maybe. Magic 1987, never the defensive player Giannis was. Magic at his best was a slight positive on defense, being generous. Realistically, he was probably just a neutral. I'm not going to say he was always a negative, but at his very best, if he was a positive at all, it was very slim. Offensively, I'd say he was better than Giannis, but Giannis is probably a little bit better of a pure scorer. Magic is just so much better of a playmaker that he beats him offensively. I am going to give the edge to Magic here just because I am really high on playmaking, but Giannis, like, honestly, it's really close. And Magic always had so much help on his team that I do have to wonder if Magic was in a worse situation, if maybe his playmaking wouldn't have been as favorable without so many great players around him all the time. Kobe Bryant is another one. Controversial statement here. I think Giannis is probably a little bit better defensively than Kobe was at his peak. People are so high on Kobe's defense, but ultimately Giannis is a much better rim protector than he is. He's a better help defender. I think Kobe was very overrated defensively throughout most of his career. He gambled a bit too much for my liking, and he just got overrated because people liked him too much, basically. Offensively, I would have to give Kobe an edge. He's a better scorer than Giannis. I would honestly say he's a slightly better playmaker than Giannis, which people don't respect his playmaking that much. He was a pretty good playmaker. He wasn't a great, like, all-time great playmaker, but he was pretty darn good as a playmaker. I'm going to give Kobe a slight edge over Giannis for now, but it's, oh man, honestly, no. I definitely like Kobe's offense more for the gap than I like Giannis's defense. The edge here goes to Kobe, but it's not nearly as far as Kobe fans would like to think it is. So that takes us decidedly out of the top 10, but now I just want to figure out, where do I put Giannis's peak? Is he still in the top 15? I think he might be. Next up on my list, we have Jerry West. Is Giannis better at his peak than Jerry West? I don't think so. I think the offensive gap is bigger than the defensive gap. I think there's a very slim defensive gap, if one exists at all, between Giannis and West. I like rim protection, but Jerry West is one of, like, arguably the second or third best defensive point guard of all time, in my opinion. One of the best defensive guards, period. So, really high on his defense. I think he's pretty close to Giannis, but he's a much better playmaker and definitely a slightly better scorer. So, Jerry West is better than Giannis as a peak player. Moses Malone. Is Moses Malone better than Giannis all time at his peak? They're pretty similar as scorers. They're pretty similar as defenders. but Giannis has a clear edge in playmaking. Moses Malone was not much of a playmaker whatsoever. He's an underrated defender, but I would say he's pretty close to Giannis. And as a scorer, he was very, very good, but so is Giannis. I would say that maybe a slight scoring edge to Malone doesn't make up for the fact that Giannis has a significant playmaking edge. So I would honestly say that Giannis has a better peak than Moses Malone does, which is crazy to say, but I honestly believe it. Looking at other power forwards, Karl Malone, is he better than Giannis at his peak? I don't think so. I think Giannis is a little bit better on both ends of the floor. He's a little bit better of a playmaker. He's a little bit better of a defender. They're pretty much even as scorers. So I'm going to say Giannis last year was better than peak Karl Malone. Dirk Nowitzki, Giannis was a little bit better defensively. Dirk's a very underrated defender, but he's still definitely not as good as Giannis. Pretty similar as playmakers. Dirk's a little bit better of a scorer, but I think the defensive gap might be larger than the offensive gap. I'm going to give Giannis the edge here. I think Giannis is a better peak player than Dirk Nowitzki was. Who else? David Robinson? Definitely not as good as Giannis offensively. Much better defensively. David Robinson is a crazy peak, but is he better than Giannis as a peak player? I feel like David Robinson had some playoff limitations that got exploited with the way that on both offense and defense, and Giannis has the same issues sometimes, and we saw it. I feel like people act like all of Giannis's issues in the playoffs have been totally washed away because he won a title. I don't fully agree with that. I think you can still limit him in the same ways he was limited in like 2019 by the Raptors with the perfect team structure, but I mean, you're asking a lot for, you can do that to pretty much any player, so it's not as big of a deal. David Robinson could be limited one-on-one because his scoring game was just not as elite. Like, there was a lot of stuff in it that you, as an elite defender, could really do to slow him down. But his defense was insane. As a team defender, one of the greatest defenders of all time. So I'm going to put that as a maybe. I'm not sure if he's better than David Robinson. And the last player I want to touch on here as a maybe is also Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard versus Giannis at their peak is tough because Kawhi didn't peak on defense and offense at the same time. His peak defensively was like 2016, 2017. His peak offensively wasn't until after his injury, and by then his defense had fallen off from, top 15 all time, in my opinion, to like regular first team all defense levels. So his peak was probably 2019, and I would say his playoff run was better in some ways, like at his best, than Giannis's, but he only kept it up for like 2 series. I don't know, that's another maybe. So I'm going to put Kawhi Leonard and David Robinson both as maybes. I would need to really do a deep dive to determine if Giannis is better than them all time. But yeah, that puts Giannis either in the top 15 or bordering on it. I think it does. Steph Curry is another guy. I forgot Steph Curry. Steph Curry over Giannis all time at his peak. If we're talking Steph Curry from last season, offense clears Giannis. I think it's very close between them, but I'm going to give Steph Curry the edge for a peak. So that puts Giannis somewhere between the 13th and 15th best peak all time, in my opinion. And yeah, Giannis has a top 15 peak all time already, which is insane to say out loud, but it makes sense. The dude is insane. He's the best player in the league right now, one of the most talented times in NBA history. Dude is an absolute beast, and he's arguably not at his peak yet. He definitely has time to continue moving up this list. So, thank you all for watching this video. Giannis has a top 15 peak of all time, in my opinion. Let me know which of these players you would rank him above or rank him below, what you disagree with. Maybe I'm totally crazy, but this is my opinion. Giannis has a top 15 peak of all time. Thank you for watching.